I'd request Mr. Ishwaran to please conduct the proceedings of this session. Those of you who are making a presentation, there's a pointer here, so you could use it to guide your presentations. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. This session is supposed to set the scene for the conference. And we had a full morning of very interesting presentations, both from the points of experience, knowledge, wisdom, and all of you have probably taken in a lot of material and information. And we also have the panelists here, each of them coming from different experiences and different networks, including the SDSN network, which Mr. Jeffrey Sachs addressed just now in his video message. So, and we were also told by Ram Booj, my co-chair, that we got to keep this short. So, taking all these into consideration, I thought I'll start it off with a question and hope that each of the panelists will reflect or react to the question within a 3 to 5 minute period. And after that, so if we went on that time frame, we would be 15 to 25 minutes from the panel, and I still would like to give some time to the audience to ask questions or make some interventions, because I know you have been all patient this morning and listening to a lot of stuff, and you must be having questions also. So that's how I'm going to run this session. I'm going to ask, I told the panelists, but I'm asking again, is anybody having any major objections onto that? See, I'm democratic. Okay, so the question I have is, we have listened to speeches which says sustainability is a very holistic thing. My colleague, my ex-colleague from UNESCO, I am the ex-colleague, he's still there. He said that it's a holistic thing. You have to have a holistic understanding of the sustainable development as a notion and concept. But then how do you act? You know, holistic action, as far as I know, I'm a very simple person. It's very difficult. Action still goes, if you're in government at a sectoral level, if you're in an academic institution at a disciplinary level. So how do you act? So I would like the panelists to reflect on this gap between thinking and action, which permeates a lot of UN agendas, and how they deal with it in their own institutions, in their own work, in their own experience, and what do they have in terms of general ideas, suggestions for the audience here to move forward. Does that sound simple enough for 3 to 5 minutes? Okay, I'm going to, Ram, you're going to sit and listen, okay? Yeah. So we're going to start with Professor Martin Siegert, Professor of Geosciences and co-director of the Grantham Institute.
Thank you. Put my microphone on, sorry. Well, thank you, everyone. And very interesting session this morning, and many things, of course, that I completely agree with. What we heard a little bit about was the urgency and the need for action on matters of sustainability and climate change, and that's perfectly true. We've probably all got individual stories on that. Mine is this. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, greenhouse gas, is far too high, and much higher than it should be. And I know that as a geologist. If we go back to about 100 million years ago, there were dinosaurs on the planet, and the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 1,000 parts per million, and that's what kept the planet warm. It was about 8 degrees warmer than it is today on average. Very difficult. No ice on the planet. Sea levels were about 60 meters higher. And then, gradually, the Earth got cooler. And it got cooler because we started to draw down, the Earth started to draw down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and it started to bury that carbon dioxide in the ground. And that's manifested as things like chalk and marble, but also coal and oil and gas. And in 1850, the year 1850, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 280 parts per million. That's what it should be. And since then, we've put in over 130 more. It's way more. In fact, you've got to go back about 4 million years, the last time the Earth had the atmospheric composition as it has right now. And the world then was about 4 degrees warmer than it is today. If we keep burning fossil fuel at the rate that we're currently burning it, by the end of this century, 2100, we'll be back at 1,000 parts per million. We'll be back in the Cretaceous when there were dinosaurs on our planet. And that's going to cause major problems for the habitability of our planet. So the urgency and the need for action on climate change couldn't be more clearer from the geological record, and yet we're not shifting it. All the work that we're hearing, the international agreements on climate change, the Paris Agreement on climate change, organisations trying to become low carbon, hasn't made any difference. The level of CO2 every year is going up. And so we need to address this problem. And what can we do? It's urgent. We need to deliver a zero carbon economy in 30 years' time. 30 years is not much time. Children at school being educated now, and at my university, Imperial College London, will be in the middle toward the end of their careers in 30 years' time. And so therefore, their career is going to witness this transition. It has to happen. And so we need to understand whether we are training this generation with the skills that they really need for the next decades that lie ahead, so that they can lead and manage this transition. And so, therefore, what does Imperial College do in this matter? We're a global university, and we like to think that we're agents of change, thinking about the future for our children. And the short answer is we don't do enough. We need to do much more, but we kind of appreciate that. Some things which we are doing is as follows. We work with our business school in Imperial College to have a dedicated climate programme in Imperial College Business School. As far as we can tell, it's the only business school that has a dedicated climate programme. Now, since the climate transition is going to need business, and the zero carbon economy is going to need business to resolve it, that's just crazy that more business schools aren't fully engaged in this problem. The second thing we do is free to access massive open online courses. And in particular, we've just launched 3 of those on low-carbon energy transitions. So if you're in a company or an organisation or a country and you're thinking about the future of energy in your environment, but you don't really know how that's going to happen, you can take these courses. They're completely free to do. They don't answer all the questions, but they show you where the doors are and how to open them, and then you're on your way. We've had over 10,000 subscribers to these conferences, to these programmes in just a few months. It's just amazing. And the third thing that we do, which is worth noting, is we focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, because the students that come to Imperial College, they want to become entrepreneurs. They want to start companies. And what we want them to do is to do that, and we want to think about them in terms of clean technology, clean tech, so that the companies that they are shaping and building and the jobs that they are creating are part of the solution to climate change, not part of the problem. So we have a centre for clean tech innovation, and we've built about 50 companies over the last 4 years. And those companies themselves have raised over $200 million to start those companies up and do things. So that's not enough. It just shows you a little bit about what we do at Imperial College. Students are the future, obviously. Training students at school and at university is critical to delivering this zero-carbon economy, and we need to do much more at Imperial College, and we all need to do much more. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dr. Vivek Menon, over to you.
Thank you, Ishwan. And thank you, Rambuj, for calling me up here. Before I answer about the action, I'm glad you talked about action. Because had you talked only about education, I would not have been fit to sit on this panel. I was a rebel all the way from school. I grew up at a time when reading Ivan Illich was the fashionable thing of a rebel. Yeah. Illich once, if I remember right, wrote that a school is an agency that makes you want society as it is. All right. So education then was not about experiential learning. It was not about tackling the problems that was around us. It was trying to learn trigonometry by rote, right? Which I rebelled, and I got out of it. Without going too much into my personal life, let me come back to this idea of sustainability. And I did, talk a little bit about it when I was at the lectern giving out the art pieces. My world is biodiversity. So when I rebelled in school, I went out to nature. I watched birds, I watched elephants, I studied them. I was trying to look at what the world has around us. And that then made me see what we have to do to save what's there. Now, this conference itself has been referred to in 3 different terms in the morning session. I think the MC perhaps erroneously referred to it as sustainable education, which is a whole different thing. I presume we are not doing that. And then many of us have referred to this as education for sustainable development, which is, I think, what I'm sure most of the audience will say that that's something that we need to talk about. But actually what you have on the board is conference on sustainability education. Not necessarily, the word development doesn't come in, which actually makes me much more comfortable in one way because of my constituents. Because my constituents don't require development. The ant does not require development. The elephant does not require development. We need to have development, but we have to ensure that they are conserved in the way they were. If you talk about sustainability in a way in which it also includes sustainable development goals for the human species, but we can look at everything else in a more holistic manner and live our life in a more holistic manner. And I'm giving examples. I mean, the knowledgeable opening panelists talked about several things that we must do in our lives. Don't drive an SUV, diesel car. Don't use plastics. None of this is going to save the tiger, unfortunately. There are other things that need to be done. None of this will save the elephant. There are specific things that need to be done. We need to plant trees. If you plant only trees, you'll get only monkeys. We talk about grassroots education, but nobody wants to grow grass in this country. We are not teaching people that grass is important. It's not always trees that are important. Water is important for life. Yeah. So when you talk of sustainability, you have to understand the natural world, and perhaps my running away from the classrooms of formalized education has helped me understand nature in a manner in which now we can talk about translating it back. So what do we do? I'm a Karma Yogi myself, therefore we talk about action, along with the eminent Dr. Erich Barucha, who everybody has mentioned, but he seems to be sitting somewhere in the middle and not in the front, which he should be, because he's a man who led the whole movement for a number of years. At the Bharatiya Vidyapith, the Wildlife Trust of India has started a postgraduate program on conservation action. This is the only degree on action that I think this country has, and perhaps the world. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this is not necessarily the didactic means of trying to find out a way of solving the problem, which I'm sure people like Professor Segert on my right would be doing, but to convert that into a workforce that has the skill. I think the chief guest talked about head, heart, and hands. The hands part is often forgotten. You have to convert this into action and do it, for which you need skill. That skill building is not necessarily learning by rote the theory. And the reason we will not, or perhaps may not, reach our goals is not that we don't know enough theory. It's because society and our societal objectives do not place our value systems to be greater than immediate societal goals, and it's because we do not have enough people who believe the theory to work with their hands to convert that into realism. That is a gap. So I think what is critical is to build enough skill in human beings to do things, to act, as you said, in order to reduce that deficit. I'll be remiss if sitting in a panel on education I don't point out, and this has been pointed out by many eminent people, that after 1986, I think we have an education policy, a new one, which does not have the word sustainability in it. It's a sad state of affairs that we are discussing that in this country. After 30-odd years, we get a new education policy which does not have sustainability in it. It does not have the word biodiversity in it. So it is extremely important, the rest of us who are doing things around the panel or otherwise, to try and work at that level and try to get this included and then translate that into actual action. And when we are talking about lack of teachers, I know Dr. Barucha used to keep talking to me about the fact that he has written the textbook for India, but there aren't enough teachers to teach it, right, who understand how to teach it. But Dr. Barucha, I'm sure you'll agree with me that now you need enough teachers to teach how people should act. And in my case, to conserve biodiversity. So not just plant trees, go beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn to Ms. Ushio Miura, Program Specialist, UNESCO Asia Pacific Bureau of Education in Bangkok.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm coming from UNESCO Bangkok office, which is the Asia Pacific Regional Office for Education. And I actually was asked by the headquarters to introduce this new international framework on ESD, but it turns out that it actually addresses directly that question that has just been asked. And I want to share with you a little bit about what this international framework says about how to actually make transformative action happen in reality for sustainability. So first of all, why do we have this new international framework on ESD? And that is because the current framework, which is called the Global Action Program on ESD, acronym GAP, that's ending at the end of this year. And secondly, as we all talked about this morning, education figures greatly, prominently in the SDGs. It's considered a driver for all the SDGs to be achieved. And in 2017, the United Nations General Assembly also adopted a resolution that states ESD is an enabler for all the SDGs. So in that context, we're finalizing this new framework, international policy framework on ESD, which is going to be, which has been endorsed by the Executive Board of UNESCO a few months ago, and it's going to be discussed again at the General Conference in November, eventually for endorsement by the General Assembly toward the end of this year to start in January 2020. So this draft framework, in the consultation process to prepare this framework, we put a lot of thoughts into how we can facilitate people to take transformative action for sustainability. And I have one slide that summarizes that, if I can show it. Which is not this one. Could anybody help me with this? Sorry.
How do I close this?
How do we?
Voila.
Yes. Yeah, that one.
You just open it. You copying it? Okay.
Okay. So I was going to share this tomorrow. We are going to have a UNESCO-led workshop tomorrow, starting at 11:30 until there are two sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon with lunch in between. But I'm going to share it with you now. Oops, I don't have it. Sorry, I thought I had it. I don't. Okay, so this is a drawing that visualizes the ideal picture of a situation where transformative action for sustainability is taking place. But this new draft framework on ESD states that there are many factors that can help facilitate transformative actions to be taking place. But among all the factors, community is a key platform that can help such collective actions to be developed and taken place. So what does it mean that a community can facilitate such transformative actions for sustainability to happen? That is by putting education and learning in the lived realities of community life everywhere for everyone, then transformation of people's practices can happen. So that's this what the picture represents, just drawing, that it's not only bringing in the concept of sustainability into classrooms, but the other way around, bringing education, learning everywhere in the community life for everyone in the community, so that everyone can be brought together to take action for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for complying with the time limit. We next move to Dr. Pramod Sharma, Director, Foundation for Environmental Education. Sir.
Thank you, sir. Foundation for Environmental Education is a program-based organization that runs 5 programs in 77 countries and through members. And sustainability education is dealt by most of the program, but especially by the Eco School program that focuses on the school part and the Eco Campus program. And we did a panel discussion at the last COP, and then based on the recommendation that we got from that panel, we circulated that amongst educators. And from 43 countries, 176 educators prioritize the actions that are required for climate change education or sustainability education. And the first, I think, what Vivek said about in some places we have the challenge of numbers of teachers, but the second biggest challenge is also about the skills to lead these transformative processes and the skill building of teachers to do a active learning approach, which also, as Karthike said this morning, can transform the quality of education, and how that capacity building that is done as part because of the nature of it can improve the teaching and learning, especially the competencies and skills which are lacking in our systems as such. The second part is also about education for climate science, which was highlighted, in particularly in context of the social media and the vested interest that goes with social media. And by the nature of the way the social media runs in terms of it tells you more what you try to know, or somebody is trying to brainwash you with some of the facts and kind of thing. And how do we communicate the real science of it and the correct science of it? And that's becoming a challenge because there is information. And I recently, 2 months back, one of my partners with whom I play table tennis said that Earth is still flat. So that's the level of challenge that we have in terms of understanding of science amongst. And there are videos and data that he tried to show me to prove his point of view. The third part, I think, which also has been third point, which has been mentioned many times, is that positive messaging. How do we? The challenge for us as educators is that how do we frame the issue as solution, not as problems? How do we basically see that? And we will be having a deliberation tomorrow in the session, basically thinking of how we shift the paradigm, which is around the problem of climate change, global warming, to action that are required in terms of global cooling, and shift the focus towards that. And the third, which is related to the pedagogy of it, is in terms of how, in terms of the fourth recommendation was to develop interactive educational materials and continuously do and focus on the pedagogy. And at Eco Schools, we have a 7-step process, and most of the programs have that project-based learning. And it is important that there is a need to focus on the quality of the process by which the children learn and they build the skills. And also with the IT and information technology coming in, the information can be available, but how do you process that is becoming a challenge, and that need to be focused on and the processes of it. One of the points that was mentioned this morning is also, which was in context of a metaphor of that, shall we focus on the forest or on the tree? And that's important, is that we need to identify few concepts, few themes, and reduce the overwhelming effect we have on our education system and the teachers with working with some integrative themes and focusing on the processes of it instead of trying to drive so many actions and so many areas of environmental issues, and help the teachers to develop that integration through subjects, and which is the challenge as such. And for that, I also agree with what Vivek also said about in terms of that how do we get ministries of education to drive this agenda. And then only the transformation can happen, and the strength of the curriculum development and the process can get strengthened. Currently, it is Ministry of Water, Ministry of Environment, or others who have a program or a project or a short-term objective to meet, who are driving the agenda, which doesn't really influences the processes and the systems in Ministry of Education, and it becomes a campaign or an event which dies down within 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years of its launch. The other challenge, and I think this is all from all the stakeholders that we work with, is to be innovative and new every time, and reinvent the same wheel and repackage the same wheel. I think our resources, time and energy, and we need to deliberate how to do it, need to go into scaling up and perfecting what we have been doing and improving what we have been doing, instead of trying to find that, okay, what is the new idea that can excite a funder or a partner or schools to work with. And this is also a challenge because there have been teachers who have continuously who ask me that, okay, what is the new theme, new project next year? And they don't see value in continuing with what they have been doing for many years as such. So these are a couple of the points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not the least, Madam Chandrika Bahadur, the SDN Association President. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to focus on two things. I will talk about what we do, which is directly in response to the question you've posed to the panel. But I want to focus on two different questions. One is the what and the other is the how. And on this, I want to pick up from what Vivek was talking about in terms of what is this education that we're talking about. And I want to broaden the theme from what traditionally has been seen as education for sustainable development, which focuses very much on the environmental side of the issue. The fact is that as we're moving ahead, it is now indistinguishable, and this is what the Sustainable Development Goals represent. It's indistinguishable for us to be able to talk purely about matters related to the environment or climate change or biodiversity from issues that relate to, say, public health. I mean, if the air we're breathing is dirty, there are public health consequences. There are consequences in terms of the kind of jobs that will be available and the kind of work people can do and the kind of livelihoods they can earn. And so there is a broader set of questions that are impossible to ignore when we're looking at the topic. So I very much like the phrasing education for sustainable development because I think it does take into account issues that have typically been conundrums of development, but that are really crucial for us to examine if we are going to have a healthy planet over the next century and beyond. So the first point of the what is this width of topics, and that's a challenge because, as Pramod was pointing out, that attention spans are limited, and so how do you get people to focus on very critical issues that are very different from one another? And this is particularly true in higher education, but I think it needs to go back a little bit below to school education as well, where we're telling people that these are the things that will matter and that will impact your quality of life, and you need to know something about them. And so that I think is the first challenge. The second is what a lot of previous speakers have spoken about, which is the issue of complexity. How do we get young children to be comfortable with and to understand the notion of complexity? Many times in countries where the education systems are performing so below par that children at a very late age in life cannot even spell the word, let alone understand what it really means. And so giving children, but also young adults, a sense of how to manage ambiguity, how to manage complexity, how to deal with many moving parts at the same time is, I think, a very, very critical skill that we need to think about teaching. And finally, there is a spectrum of what you know that is relevant for you in your immediate surrounding, what's relevant for you in the community and the country that you live in, and then what's relevant globally. And understanding the differences, that there are some actions that you can do in your day-to-day lives that are going to have a profound effect on the way you live, but may have absolutely no effect on the planet. And yet there are some decisions that are taken globally that you need to influence, and what are the mechanisms that you have of influencing those decisions. So these are, I would say, the three specific substantive issues around this kind of education, which at least we try to address when we're moving forward. And the how is also, of course, very hard, and that's the central question that's been posed. I think I completely agree with Pramod that the focus has to be on doing this at scale and doing this rapidly. I think if we're going to continue to be at the margins of education systems, which this kind of education seems to be right now, we've actually we've lost the plot. And so we at STSN, we use technology in a very big way. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we need to find ways in which we can reach a very large number of young people at the same time. The second critical element of the how is to make this flexible. Education will not stop once children graduate from school. Many cases it actually doesn't happen within the school either. So how do we actually continue lifelong learning, and how do we make it flexible so that it becomes easy for people to integrate it as part of their lives, rather than feel like they've missed the window and now they have to make an extraordinary effort to learn. So as educators, as advocates in this field, one of the things we focus on is how do we make this accessible everywhere so that people see the value of this education in their lives. And the third element of the how is to do it, right? So learning by doing, encouraging active learning, and trying to ensure that people who are learning topics have a connect with what's going on in the world around them, that they can try something, even if it's not the big complicated concept they're learning about, but they can try a piece of it, experience it, and that is what will stay with them. So what do we do? Just in a very quick minute. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network itself is a network of about 1,200 universities around the world. And we set up something called the SDG Academy, which is very similar to what Dr. Martin was talking about. It's a platform for massive open online courses. We've had about 236,000 learners from around the world sign into our courses. We offer courses that are made by multiple faculty from around the world. So one of the innovations that we are able to bring together, because we're not an academic institution, is that we're able to bring faculty with very different perspectives, with very different sources of knowledge, very different backgrounds, and help them teach together to students who they would never meet otherwise, or students who would never have access to hearing from them under normal circumstances. And what that's allowed us to do is to create a global community which first educates, knowledge is the first element of it, but then by the end of these courses also encourages students to act. And so we always leave our courses on a note of what can I do. So we take it to the global and then bring it back to the personal. It's one attempt. I think it's been an incredibly interesting and impactful instance of what we could do. But I think this is the sort of direction where we have to think outside a traditional classroom and traditional teacher-student relationship to really try and encourage movements of action which are based on knowledge. Thank you.
My time says 13:31, and my time normally is ahead of me, so maybe there are a few minutes. I thought I'll take some questions at least, 1, 2, 3, whatever, so that the audience feels they have an interaction. Please ask questions in relation to what the panelists said. Don't start talking about your institution or what you're doing, which can come in later sessions in the afternoon. So has anybody got any questions for the panelists based on what they said? You can bring in some ideas from the morning session, but it has to be addressed to one or all the panelists.
Yeah. My name is Saurabh, and I'm a data analyst by profession, so I...
Hold it, I can't see you.
I'm this side, I just stand, sorry. So,
can you introduce yourself first, and then ask the question?
My name is Saurabh, and I work for NBN. And I'm a data analyst by profession, and that's the reason I hugely believe in the quantification concept. And I think we have quantified the problem we have. One of the speakers talked about the CO2 levels before and now, so we can understand the problem has been quantified, and even we got a good framework to deal with this problem as well. But my question is, how do you quantify the engagement of the stakeholders to solve this problem? I believe that the entire world is the stakeholders in solving this problem, but when we talk really about the students, and so how do you quantify the engagement of the students? You talk about the online courses, you talked about MOOCs, and I think they told me like 10,000 students registered for the MOOCs, but recent survey by KPMG told that only 60% people could complete those courses, even though registered for such a huge number, but only 60% people completed these courses, and out of 60% completion, only 30% passed those courses. So how do you quantify the engagement for such courses?
You are addressing that question to any particular panelist, or you wouldn't mind anybody answering?
Anyone can answer, that's okay.
Who wants to take it?
That's a really top question. Not sure I have a very good answer. I mean, ultimately, the bottom line of all of this is the level of CO2 in the atmosphere. Doesn't matter what we do, right? If that keeps going in the wrong direction, then we're failing. And so the short answer is we're not doing a very good job with that. Now, we're aware of that, of course, and we know that's the situation, and we all know that what you've heard here already today, this morning, is that we must do much more. And so I think it might actually not be particularly helpful to try and do what you've suggested and quantify that. Because the future is going to be different and things are going to go on. What we need to think about is ways in which we're optimistic about the future. And to be I am optimistic. And one of the reasons that I'm optimistic is because young people that I speak to at university and at schools are collectively, generally very positive and enthusiastic about this issue. And they are passionate and they want to change it. What we have to make sure is that we provide an education and training that matches that enthusiasm. And I think we are not yet doing the job that we need to do, but we appreciate that. And then we have to understand what opportunities there are for those people to continue that passion into the workplace and then into the future. And again, we're not doing a very good job on that. How many jobs are there in the clean tech sector? Well, not much globally, but there will be more. Clean tech is actually growing at about 15% a year globally, and that's really good. And so you can imagine that if you try to quantify the answer to your question now, it wouldn't be a very good one. But there are lots of things which are changing, and that's why I remain optimistic about the future. The transition is what we have to undergo is staggering. I mean, I talk about it kind of flippantly, a zero-carbon economy in 30 years' time. But try and understand what that is, right? I mean, look out, when we go back to hotels and things, you'll be driving around probably in diesel cars, probably. And in 30 years' time, we can't be doing that. And that's just one aspect of our lives. Everything has to change, and it has to start with education. Stakeholder engagement is really important, so I'm sure others will have things to contribute on that. The transition has to happen. It's starting slowly. It has to pick up a pace.
Thank you. There was a lady behind this television screen, which I couldn't... Please.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? My name is Divya Tiwari, and I am an e-learning consultant. So I have 2 decades of experience working with corporates and government in capacity building and curriculum design and e-learning and all. But the focus here over the years is changing to school education as far as sustainable development is concerned, which is very pertinent. My question is twofold, actually. The first part is that a lot of students drop out after a certain class, a 7th or 8th standard. So how is it that any of the bodies who are working around sustainable development are focusing on those individuals, how to include them in the agenda? And the second is that is there a specific design that you have for scalability that the 2 of you were talking about? What is it? Are you associating with NGOs like most of the corporates do to take your agenda forward? Or are you really skilling people hands-on so that they can be independent and then take this objective forward. Like the WTI could probably have some vocational aspect where you could train people hands-on and they can, spread across the various parts, and similar for you too. I'm sorry for the long question.
Thank you. Vivek Menon, the rebel? No?
I can answer parts of that. I can't answer what you do with dropouts. I mean, that maybe somebody who deals with dropouts might be able to do. I was not dealt with very well. But you said that you're happy that sustainable development is being taken to schools. This is what I started with. I think the conference has got it right. It's sustainability that's being taken to school. And
I correct myself.
I am glad that that's being taken to school. If it's SDG that we're taking to schools alone, 2030, you would not have the schools grown up enough, the children in the schools grown up enough to actually meet your SDGs. Your SDGs will still fail. Education, if you want to meet your SDGs, must be at policymakers. And God alone knows that many of our policymakers require more of an education than many of our school children. So we need to focus our education there. Education is not just a school thing, yeah? But sustainability is a school thing. Value-based education of sustainability is a school thing. So that's one thing. The other very quick thing I want to talk about is scale, because two of our panelists also mentioned it and you also asked me. And scale is often thought of in a Western concept of building World Trade Towers. Scale is vertical, yeah? But scale can be horizontal. And one suggestion I would make is that, for example, there are several people in this room who have spoken and many who haven't spoken who are actually doing what we are talking about in this panel. But how many of us actually work together? Very few of us, okay? So a patchwork quilt will get you scale. A patchwork blanket will give you warmth. You need that warmth, okay? So I suggest that we turn some of our energies into the seams that actually hold these patchwork together, rather than coming up with innovations that build a new idea which builds on top of something and goes forward. So the scales can be conceptualized in different ways.
Other panelists, any thoughts?
A quick comment on this is that I think the focus need to shift from, I just extend what Vivek is saying, from what to how, and the process part of it. And that is the value I am seeing in the programs that FE is also running, is that to improving the process year and after year, but not, and then leaving what to the stakeholder that, and running that through that process is an important element, because then how can be scaled up easily, but then what is a difficult thing to scale up?
Thank you. Chandrika?
A quick comment on your question about dropouts. I think that's a bigger challenge facing the education sector. And that's why I think when we do our work, we try not to make it institution limited. So it doesn't matter if you are in school or in college or not.
So how would you approach them?
So we actually don't do face-to-face interactions at all. So everything is happening online. I mean, this is where you can really harness the power of the net and connectivity. No, not for connectivity for children in rural areas in India, no. So that's a target group that we have not been able to reach, right? So that's a gap, and that's a gap which has, not just for this objective, but in general it's unacceptable that we have a situation where more than half our adolescent population drops out. So that's a fundamentally different question. So of course that's something that's critical. But I think when what we're trying to do is what we have to aim at is to build an ecosystem where every child can learn, right? That is the dream, and that is what we're working towards. And so in that context, you want to find innovative ways of reaching every child, whether the system fails them or doesn't.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My boss here has said that I have to stop it at 13:45. So my time says there's going to be 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask this wise-looking gentleman here.
Not a wise-looking gentleman. But I'm going to ask one very important question, which I think hasn't been sufficiently addressed this morning. And so anybody could answer this, and I'm sure I'll get multiple answers. What is that one trigger action that children take up very easily in trying to understand sustainability? What is it that triggers them to act? And I'm sure all of us look at this differently. So how do we get down to what is it that triggers them? Is it an exposure to nature? Is it an exposure to the woes of the world? Is it an exposure to trying to make the world different? What is it that attracts students and excites them into doing this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting insight. I apologize, I have to close. You know, the advantage of being a panel chair is that you only ask questions. You don't have to give any answers. So, I'd like all of you to thank our panelists once again. And this is only the beginning. I hope this particular session, which was titled Setting the Scene, has given you a little bit of flavor of what you can expect in the next 2 days. And I also hope that you will go to the different sessions which have been planned based on your own interests and ideas. Martin said 1,000 years ago, no, several million of years ago, the carbon parts per million was 1,000, and there were dinosaurs around. So if we go back to thousands parts per million, there will be still life around. We may not be around. That's our problem. So how do we solve that problem is something we need to talk about. Good luck with your conference. And as they say, bon appétit also as we are going towards lunch. Thank you.